Having a strong web presence is crucial in today's digital landscape, especially for small business owners. Your website might be the first and sometimes the only way potential customers learn about you and your services. But hiring a developer isn't always feasible, which is completely understandable. After all, you're running a small business, you don't have unlimited resources. The good news, there are some fantastic website builders out there designed to make the process easy and affordable. The downside, with so many options, it can get overwhelming fast. That's where this video comes in. Over the past few years, I've worked with several of these platforms, starting with WordPress, switching to Squarespace and then Wix, and eventually returning to WordPress. Currently, I'm rebuilding my website in Webflow, so I thought it would be a good idea to share with you my experience with these platforms. That way, you'll have an easier time picking the page builder that's right for you without the hassle of spending hours upon hours researching the subject. Let's go! At this point, I think it's worth noting that there's no one perfect platform. They all have their own unique set of quirks and limitations. Wix Studio, for example, is an excellent all-around service, but a couple of limitations hinder its usability. The same goes for all other platforms. WordPress, Webflow, Typo3, Pixpa, Squarespace, they all have their issues. To quickly cut through the noise, we'll focus on the builders that meet the following key criteria: ease of use, wide feature set, affordability, and finally, good support. For me, the three platforms that meet all of these criteria are Webflow, WordPress, and Wix Studio. Notice that I'm not talking about regular Wix. Wix Studio is a modern platform that can build truly responsive websites. There are other solutions out there that might be cheaper or easier to use, but because they don't meet all of the criteria, they're excluded from this comparison. Having a platform with CMS capabilities is quite important, as it can reduce the amount of time needed to build a website. Thankfully, all three platforms, Wix Studio, WordPress, and Webflow, have this functionality. But before we go further, let's first define what a CMS is. A content management system allows you to build your pages dynamically. So instead of building them one by one, you build a template once, and you use that to automatically generate all other pages. You would use a CMS system to build all sorts of things: e-commerce, news sites, blogs, any sort of content really that can be grouped into a specific category. Let me show you how I'm using it on my website. Currently, it's running on WordPress, but WordPress is a little bit unique, so let's start with Wix Studio. I recreated my portfolio using Wix's CMS, and this is how it looks on the back end. There's a column for the project title, the project description, and along with other things, a series of images. These are the elements that will make up each individual page. Now, if we check the page template, notice that each element on the page is connected to different parts of the portfolio database. So the header is connected to the project title, this block of text is connected to the project description, and so on and so forth. Once everything is properly connected, we've essentially built all of the pages of the portfolio. So if we switch to the debris page, all the page elements update accordingly. The beauty of this system is that if at some point you decide that you want to move or adjust some of the elements, you only have to do it once, and all other pages will update accordingly. Webflow and WordPress work pretty much the same way. Here's how Webflow's CMS looks. Here's the database with all the entries, and here's the template for the different portfolio projects. WordPress is the ugliest of the bunch, and what's worth noting here is that by default we only have one post type to work with, and that's blog posts. In order for us to extend WordPress's capabilities, we need to use plugins. This is a common theme with WordPress. Out of the box, WordPress is quite bare bones. If you want to build anything other than a blog or a very basic website, you have to rely on a lot of plugins. How many depends on your experience, but still, a platform should be robust enough to not have to rely on plugins for basic functionality. We'll talk more about that later on, but for now let's focus on WordPress's CMS functionality. Through the use of a plugin, in this case ACF, we can create the different post types needed. I have one for my portfolio projects and another one for my Gumroad products. Here we define the page's data, and then we can go to the individual post type and link that data to the appropriate content. As you can see, having CMS functionality on your website is quite neat because it allows you to define and categorize your content the way you want to, not the predefined way a platform decided at some point in time. Squarespace, for example, is a platform with a lot of guardrails. It works great if you want to quickly put something up online. However, once you start thinking of more complex things to do, you'll hit a brick wall really fast. So, if you want to organize your eShop in a specific way, or you want to group your content in any way imaginable, I would suggest going with any of the other three options. WordPress is strong in e-commerce, but it's going to be a messy experience. WordPress is clunky, annoying, and you will constantly want to throw your computer out of the window. You will have more flexibility compared to Wix Studio and Webflow, but you'll be sacrificing ease of use and peace of mind. WooCommerce, which is the main e-commerce platform most WordPress sites use, is very powerful. But just to give you an idea of how painful it is to run e-commerce on WordPress, I've spent the time and created a complete store for all of my products with WooCommerce and WordPress. I've linked it up to Amazon's AWS so the users can download the content fast. I've also created dedicated account spaces where the user can re-download their content and store their credit card data. After doing all that though, I just completely scrapped the project because it was going to take an immense amount of time to maintain and safeguard. But if you want to have the most flexibility, like picking your own payment provider, WooCommerce and WordPress is the way to go. For any other type of CMS content though, there's no reason to not go with Webflow or Wix Studio. Unfortunately, there's one big limitation with Wix Studio, which might be a deal breaker for you. It certainly was for me. Currently, in Wix's CMS, we have to have the same amount of elements on all of our database entries in order for the layout to not break. Let me show you what I mean. My projects here don't have the same amount of pictures. Some have more, others have less. Wix Studio doesn't like that. So if we go to the template and pick, let's say, the R14 promo page, notice what happens. This page has only 2 images compared to the other entries that have 4 or more. As a result, the rest of the page is populated with dummy content. Also, for some reason, one of the debris images shows up here, but you get the point. This is not how the page should look. After talking to support, apparently this is a limitation with the system. You can only disable these extra elements with code, which of course is not what you want to hear when building the website yourself. And frankly, it shouldn't be that way. Webflow and WordPress don't have that issue at all. It doesn't matter if one page has 6 entries and the other one has 2. The pages will only show the populated elements. So, if you're considering Wix Studio, keep that in mind. It's a shame that this limitation exists because Wix Studio as a service is very solid. Webflow also has its faults, but it's a different kind of issue. The smaller plan, called Basic, doesn't have CMS functionality at all. You have to go to the higher plans to get it, which of course means having to pay more money. So if you want CMS functionality on Webflow, be aware that it's going to get pricey. Despite that though, Webflow is the better CMS platform of the bunch. Unlike WordPress, we don't have to install several plugins to make things work, and the UI and overall experience is absolutely wonderful. That's in stark contrast to WordPress and its messy interface. So the point for this one goes to Webflow. Another huge deciding factor when picking a web platform has to be the feature set of the service overall. I'm not only talking about software features, but what the platform has to offer as a complete package. For example, what kind of hosting do we get? Can we reach out to support and get a solution at a reasonable time frame? Can we quickly restore to an earlier version of the website if things go haywire? Stuff like that. The best all-rounder in this category by far is Wix Studio. Wix has packed so much even in the lowest tier plans that no other platform can compare. They offer amazing support, and overall they're generous with the caps of different features, CMS items, amount of editors that can work on a website, etc. And when it comes to bandwidth, there are no limitations whatsoever. On WordPress, you can match this type of bandwidth usage by using a good hosting provider, but it's going to get pricey compared to Wix. With WordPress, web hosts do this sleazy thing where they offer a very cheap price for the first year, but the year after, the price doubles or in most cases triples. So you could very easily end up in a scenario where your WordPress hosting costs as much as a full Wix Studio plan. The solution to that is switching hosts every year, which is not the most ideal way of doing things. Your other option would be to get a hosting plan for 4 or more years. And then there's Webflow. Webflow has some of the stingiest plans I've ever seen. Actually, Framer has some really bad plans too, but that's a whole other story. Webflow has bandwidth limits, it has limits on the amount of pages you can create, but the even crazier limitation is the amount of form submissions you can have per month. That means how many people can contact you through the form of your website. To me, that's an insane way to differentiate your plans. But let's get back to the baffling bandwidth limitations. The basic plan offers 10 gigabytes of bandwidth. The plan after that, which is the actually useful plan, allows for 50 gigabytes of bandwidth. Of course, bandwidth can cost money, and what others describe as unlimited is not actually true, but having to constantly monitor your usage is not the way I personally want to spend my time. And just to give you an idea, as you're building your website, you're already using up this bandwidth. I've reached almost 200 megabytes of traffic, and no one else but me has visited this website. And keep in mind that the images I'm using are already quite optimized. What's worth noting here is that Webflow reduced those bandwidth limits a few months ago, or maybe a year or so ago. So the situation is not going to get better in the future. It will probably get worse. This is the part that annoys me with Webflow. You're basically hoping that your business won't be successful enough to reach these artificial limits, because when that happens, you'll have to pay a lot of money. And it's obvious that these limitations are artificial. For example, it won't cost Webflow anything if more people contact you through your website's form. This is just beyond ridiculous. But let's also talk a little bit about support. Again, Wix is really good in this department. You have different ways of talking to them. You can either use chat or you can ask them to call you. And of course, you can use email. If you choose chat or a phone call, they will always inform you how long it will take before they reach out to you. In most cases, it's within a minute or two, but even if you have to wait longer, it's not going to be an insane amount of time. As I was evaluating Wix Studio, I contacted them through chat about 2 issues. Both of these sessions didn't last longer than 5 minutes, and by the end I had the solution to my problem. That alone is a huge deal when you're trying to set up your website. With WordPress, you're basically relying on yourself. Of course, there's support from the plugin creators and your hosting provider, but this past year as I was running my own WordPress site, I had to do a lot of troubleshooting myself. Either the support takes too long, or the hosting provider or the plugin creator can't give you the answers you need, because all WordPress builds are custom, so there's no easy way for them to troubleshoot your exact issue without having to dig into your installation. So unless your issue is about a very generic problem, you're essentially on your own. With Webflow, things are a little bit better, but the support isn't as good as Wix's. all communications happen through email. They do have chat functionality, but whenever I tried to use it, I couldn't find anyone online. As you can imagine, communication through email takes a while. It took me around 2 days to find a solution to my problem, and it looks like support tries to nudge you to use their forums. From my limited interaction, I think if you're not a business or enterprise customer, they don't really care. Don't get me wrong, their support is super friendly and they do try their best to help you out, but it takes a long time to get an answer and it feels like you're not really a priority. So to summarize, purely from a service perspective, Wix Studio wins hands down. Close second comes WordPress, where you can basically build the plan and features you want and at a competitive price point. But you have to know what you're doing. It's not rocket science, but you have to devote quite a bit of time to learn pretty much every aspect of web development. And dead last is Webflow. You get a really nice product, but if you want to match the service and feature set of Wix Studio, you have to pay more. Which brings us to some WordPress users like to brag about how inexpensive WordPress is, but when they say that, they usually refer to web hosting costs. Running a WordPress site, though, requires a lot more than that. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to build anything other than a blog or a very basic website with some static pages, you have to rely on a lot of plugins to add the missing functionality. All these plugins cost money too. I've mentioned already ACF. That's for the ability to create different post types and fields. Then there's file management. If you want to keep your uploaded files like documents, images, etc. organized, you need some basic organizational features like folders, bulk editing, etc. But guess what? The vanilla installation of WordPress has none of that. You need a plugin for that too. Or how about some nicer gallery options, or a page builder to help you build your website, or a mail marketing application to help you with your email campaigns, or a plugin to protect your website from the gazillion bot attacks. I could go on and on. Running a WordPress site can get expensive. If you know what you're doing, you can limit that cost, but it's definitely not dirt cheap as some people suggest. On the other hand, we have Wix Studio and Webflow. Both of them can use plugins, but you don't have to for basic functionality like asset management, CMS capabilities, and page building. If you run the numbers, it's actually cheaper to have your website on a service like Wix rather than WordPress. For example, the lowest plan for Wix Studio costs €12 per month, which is €144 per year. A WordPress site with just 3 plugins can cost more than €200 per year. That's close to 40% more. And with Wix, you don't have to deal with managing multiple subscriptions from plugin developers. Webflow can get pricey too. To get the CMS functionality, we need the CMS plan, which goes for $23 per month, which is $276 per year. And if you want to add more functionality, like e-commerce, things can get even pricier. So from a purely financial perspective, Wix Studio is the winner. But of course, pricing is not our only criteria. Webflow, despite its horribly priced plans, offers a great product. After a year of dealing with WordPress, I was ready to switch to any other platform. For a brief second, I was even considering Squarespace. That's how desperate I was. Using WordPress feels like you're working with this old piece of software that has a ton of other stuff piled on top of it. Bits and pieces that shouldn't really work together, but just by pure luck they do. But let me try and give you a better idea of what it's like to work with WordPress. First off, we have the bot attacks. WordPress has a very easy to predict login screen. It's essentially your domain name with WP admin after it, which of course is a great way to invite countless bots and hackers. Having dealt with WordPress before, I knew that I had to take steps to protect myself. But here's the thing, if you don't have insane levels of restriction like limited login attempts, automatic IP blocking, blocking by region, and a ton more, you can receive a ton of attacks. Before limiting pretty much every single thing on the login screen. I had days with more than 3,000 failed login attempts. I even recorded a couple of days with more than 30,000 attempts. Then you have to deal with making sure that all your different plugins and their updates didn't break anything on your website. Even though it doesn't happen often, it can happen. And if that wasn't enough, you also have to deal with a very discombobulated interface. There's no real standard, so everything looks different depending on each developer's taste. WordPress has its own UI. Most plugins also use their own UI. Then if you're lucky, your web host will use cPanel, which is a completely different system and UI experience. Pretty much everything works in its own way, and you have to learn all of it. There's no one cohesive environment where you can just concentrate and build your website. And to top it all off, you have to deal with managing your plugin subscriptions that of course use their own websites. Everything about WordPress is messy. With Wix and Webflow, you don't have to deal with any of that. You have one environment with one cohesive UI, and that's it. No bots trying to hack you, no plugin maintenance, or anything of that sort. But why did I specifically pick Webflow over Wix Studio? Wix Studio is a great platform, and you won't be disappointed if you want to go that route. For me, it came down to Wix's CMS limitations and Webflow's overall feature set. As I mentioned earlier, Webflow's databases don't have to have the same amount of entries for the CMS pages to work properly. And in my case, I want to use several of them to cover all of my needs for my digital products, Patreon pages, a blog area, etc. So Wix's limitations would get in my way from day one. So there's no sense for me to build a website there when I know that it won't fit my needs. I did it a couple of years ago and it worked fine. I really got to appreciate how smoothly everything worked, but this time around I want to do things a little bit differently. Webflow also has a couple of cool things like the use of classes, which makes applying and editing styling to your content fast and easy. Let me quickly show you with a really simple example. This image has this rounded corners class, and it basically does what it says. It rounds the edges of the image. Every image on this page uses that class, and you can use it throughout your website. So when the time comes to adjust this, I can easily modify the class, and all the images or other elements that use this class will update in an instant. A better example for this would be a product choice panel. You can use a class for the padding, font sizes, etc., so you don't have to repeat the same steps for each of these panels. The other thing I like in Webflow is the way page building works. It's a very predictable way of doing things. Basically, every layout is a box within a box within a box. The parent block defines how the children will be formatted, and with that simple rule, we can build pretty much every page imaginable. Wix Studio works in a very similar manner, but I think Webflow's less glitchy interface makes things feel a lot smoother. I also absolutely love how Webflow's SEO tools work. We can build the page's search and share data in a very parametric way. We can use a combination of text and CMS fields to automatically create the data for all pages without having to type things manually. I hate doing this part, and with Webflow, I was done in a matter of a minute or two. On top of that, Webflow's system feels solid, and in general it performs a lot better than Wix Studio. I had a Wix glitch out to me several times, and there are occasions where things slow down. It's not that bad, but you can sense that Webflow is a better built platform. It goes without saying that I'm not a fan of Webflow's pricing tiers that try to nickel and dime you, but after working with WordPress, I'm willing to give it a try. I'll sign up for a year, and if it doesn't suit me, I'll reevaluate then. Who knows, maybe in a year's time, I'll switch to Squarespace. I'm joking, that will never happen. And this, my friends, is the reason why you'll never see a Squarespace brand deal in this channel. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.